Whew. All right, your SEC Insider Hit this morning is brought to you by Eye Care Professionals. They have a new location, Flowood, Belmead. Eye Care Professionals, blade-free LASIK and cataract surgery. Dr. Kirk Jeffries and Eye Care Professionals, new location, Flowood at Belmead. We're live in the Bank Plus studio. You're listening to 105.9 The Zone, ESPN. This is the Out of Bounds Show. Our guests join us on the Modelo guest line. We welcome in our friend Steve Palazzolo, NFL Insider, podcast, all that kind of good stuff. PFF.com, Pro Football Focus. And he joins us on 105.9 The Zone. Steve, how does Julio Jones moving from the Falcons to the Titans, how does that impact A.J. Brown going forward?
Oh, it's huge. I mean, it's not just Julio Jones going. It's Julio Jones going to a team that really was A.J. Brown and no one else. You know, if you look at the Titans offseason, they lost Corey Davis, they lost their 2 and 3 receivers as far as receiving yards go. Corey Davis, the wide receiver, tight end, Jonnu Smith, and didn't really replace them with anybody. They have a backup tight end essentially slated to start in Anthony Ferkser. They brought in Josh Reynolds from the Rams at receiver, who's pretty much a third or a fourth receiver, and they had him as their number 2. So Julio coming in, it's absolutely massive for A.J. Brown, and it's just, it's football. You can't allot all your resources defensively to one receiver. You have 2 legitimate freak receivers on the outside, a freak running back in Derrick Henry. So, the Titans are going to be fascinating to watch with all those incredible athletes.
What Tannehill on a scale of 1 to 10, according to Pro Football Focus, is a what?
Man, I can't figure out Tannehill. He's had back-to-back elite seasons by our grades, but we also have a career of pretty much average to above average play prior to that. So, I mean, if you're just looking at the last 2 years, yes, Tannehill's not the type of guy that's throwing the ball 40 times a game and, carrying a team, but in that play-action heavy system, he has executed incredibly. So scale of 1 to 10, right now he's like a 7 or an 8. I mean, he's up there. Whereas I think the rest of his career, you'd look at him and say he's a 5, and every now and again he'd be a 6. And last couple of years, he's actually been more like an 8 or a 9 as far as execution goes.
So does that go to coaching and culture? And he was just with a terrible franchise that had no idea who they were and what they wanted to do. And with Vrabel and the Titans in their front office, he lands at a spot where they do understand who they are and what they are. And he's really been talented the whole time. Just needed someone to, quote unquote, bring it out.
Yeah, I think there's definitely elements to that. I mean, the Dolphins, their roster wasn't great for most of the time. They tried to build, have playmakers around him. But just like with Matt Ryan, I like Matt Ryan a lot. But when you look at his stats with and without Julio Jones, it is a massive difference, even just from a pure grading standpoint, from our perspective. And I do think that has benefited Tannehill similarly in Tennessee. He's had, A.J. Brown on the outside. He's had a decent supporting cast, a play-action-heavy system. Of course, defense is trying to stop Derrick Henry. So I do think the situation and supporting cast and culture have all certainly helped Tannehill reach his potential.
Okay, so Titans in the Super Bowl?
Yeah, right to the Super Bowl. For one player.
Derrick Henry. So, we understand the devaluing of running backs, yet he's pretty darn special. But all right, so if you're looking at this and you're looking at the Titans, the Tannehill to A.J. Brown and Tannehill to Julio for y'all is so much more important and valued than what Henry brings to the table week to week. Is that correct? Is that accurate?
It is. But there are – so, like, when you're evaluating running backs, it's as much how well can you predict them going forward as much as you look back and – so I can look back and say Derrick Henry has been a very valuable piece for that team. It's fair to say that. I mean, as a running back, the biggest thing that you can do is create outside of your offensive line, and that's what Derrick Henry's done. The offensive line has been good, but he also has created almost 4 yards after contact for each of the last 2 seasons. That's absurd.
Dang.
So he's doing a lot on his own. The problem with running back is always projecting it forward. It's, if I went out, even with Julio Jones and his age and his injury question marks, if I had to predict who do I feel more confident in next year, Julio or Derrick Henry, I'm always taking, the guy that's a part of the pass game. I'm always taking Julio more than the running back, just because you just never know with running backs, and there are other factors at play. So Derrick Henry has been a very, probably the most valuable running back the last couple of years. And but depending on him going forward, I still think the Titans only go as far as Tannehill to A.J. Brown to Julio Jones take them. They go as far as the pass game can take them as far as the playoffs go.
Ryan Tannehill, starting quarterback for the Titans, has had 2 great seasons, and now they add Julio Jones. All right. This is interesting, to say the least. Are they your favorite in the AFC South, or is it the Colts?
So we have our opinions, but we also have our hard numbers, our analytics dorks all put together.
Okay.
The analytics dorks, though, at PFF have the Titans jumping about half a win with the Julio Jones signing, and that's a massive number for a non-quarterback. And we do have them now as the favorites in the AFC South, just statistically. So that's how much Julio Jones moves the needle, as much as any non-quarterback would in the NFL.
Do you think Carson Wentz with the Colts, now that he's out of whatever was happening with the Eagles and reunites with a former coach where he had success, what are your expectations? Do you think he can at least be good, around 10 to 15 in the NFL as far as quarterbacks?
Yeah. I think he's somewhat in the middle, probably where Phillip Rivers was last year, middle of the pack type of quarterback. We've seen Wentz play really well, but that was back in 2017. We've seen him play average football, 2018 and really 19 before until the end of the season when the whole roster fell apart. And then last year, Wentz was the worst starting quarterback in the NFL. So we've seen him all over the place. I think the truth is somewhere in the middle. My concern with him at the Colts is Wentz has always had a good offensive line. You know how you say you've got when you have a young quarterback, you need to have a great offensive line. Well, they just need to be good. Wentz has had a very good offensive line every year of his career, top 10 by our grades, other than last year. The one year where he excelled, though, Wentz, was when he had Alshon Jeffrey and Nelson Aguilar and, Zach Ertz was healthy and looking good. He had a plethora of really good playmakers, and he was chucking it all over the place and having a great year. Once his playmakers got worse, Carson Wentz got worse, but the line even, stayed the same. So he'll have that same really good offensive line in Indianapolis, but I don't think their pass catchers are all that good. They're just okay. T.Y. Hilton and Zach Pascal and Mo Alley Cox is a pretty good tight end. So I think the Colts could have done more. Like if Julio Jones went to the Colts, they would be the favorites in the AFC South, because they really need like a true number one, or at least, another legitimate playmaker or two there, I think, to maximize Carson Wentz. So I think it's going to be a bit of a challenge to put an explosive passing attack together, but I think Wentz will be solid and bounce back from last year's disaster.
Okay. Steve Palazzolo, Pro Football Focus, PFF.com, on the Modelo guest line. Okay, if the Saints are not a contender in the NFC South, can the Falcons challenge? They lose Julio, but they add Kyle Pitts, which you can do a bunch of cool stuff with. Can the Falcons challenge the Buccaneers?
I don't go plus Kyle Pitts. I'd say, okay, they can. Matt Ryan's still capable. He's still good enough, and they can go out there and try to put up 30 points every week, and they've got the pieces to do it. I think just even if you call it a lateral move, that would be, from Julio Jones to Kyle Pitts, that would be saying, wow, Pitts is a future Hall of Famer already. He might be, but man, that's a lot of pressure on him. So I think the Falcons it's going to be a challenging year for them, I think, unless what happens defensively. Sometimes defensively you just get a new scheme, new looks and all that stuff. Dean Pease is calling the plays over there now. He's got a completely different system. And while the talent doesn't look great on paper, Pease is pretty good at scheming it up and creating pressure and various things like that. It would take something like that defensively where the pieces just fit in year one. And again, the offense will still be good. It'll still be fine. So there's that chance, but I don't know. As far as challenging the Bucs, I don't really see it for the Falcons this year.
What do you think Alabama fans will do if and when Mac Jones and Tua are out of the league in 3 years?
Tell you about the next guy.
Ah,
I'll tell you about the next great quarterback that's in. Mac Jones is not going to be out of the league in 3 years.
you don't think so?
Be good. No, I think he might be pretty good with the Patriots. I think he's gonna perform better than you expect. I'll say. Start with that.
Even with their okay, right now today, if you had to rank the Patriots skill position players, where would they rank out of the 32 teams, Steve?
Well, I did that last week, and they were in the 20s. They're not great. Yeah. The thing is, they're much better than they were last year, and they do have that good offensive line. So they actually do. They have a top 4 or 5 offensive line. So as much as I said, hey, that's not the thing that moves the needle, they at least have that baseline. The tight ends can be really good. Wide receivers are a little bit below average, but it's far better than they're trying to get out there the last 2 years. That's how bad it's been in New England.
So would you say a top 5 offensive line in New England?
Yeah, definitely. They're from a really good run blocking group and a good pass blocking group as well.
I can't remember who that guy was, Blake, the legendary O-line coach that Belichick had for years. We'll have to look that up. I think he left within the
Scarnecchia.
Yes.
Yeah, he's out.
Yes. Yeah. Okay. That guy was considered like one of the best offensive line coaches in the NFL for years, right?
Yeah, he was. We actually put numbers to that too. The most valuable offensive line coach, just from like a wins standpoint, added wins in the PFF era back to 2006. So yeah, Scarnecchia was the hype was legit. We put actual numbers to back it up.
And was he number 1?
He was number 1. Yeah, most valuable offensive line coach of the last 15 years.
That's incredible, Scarnecchia. That's a cool name. That sounds like a football name from the Northeast. Steve Palazzolo, PFF.com, Pro Football Focus on the Out of Bounds Show. So you feel like Mac Jones will hang around the league for a while. Do you have that kind of confidence? Yeah. Do you have that kind of confidence with Tua?
Man, I have less confidence with Tua. The more information I get, I had confidence in him coming out of Alabama. I thought he just looked small last year. I just thought he looked small, and I thought the ball didn't come out of his hand that great. He just didn't look like an NFL quarterback, to be honest. I think he's got elements. Tua's got elements of his game where he works really fast through progressions. He does a lot of things nice. He does a lot of things well. But I always thought at Alabama he would have to see the guy, watch him make a break, and when he was open, he could throw the ball accurately. And he obviously didn't have that last year with Miami's group of pass catchers. And then you have Ryan Fitzpatrick, who's like, "Oh, you're not open? Well, you're open in my mind. I'm just chucking it up there." and that was the difference. You saw that when Fitzpatrick played football versus when Tua played for the Dolphins. Now this year with Will Fuller, with Jalen Waddle coming in, they still have Devontae Parker, Mike Gesicki. I think Tua's going to be better, but they're starting to test him out, right? We're gonna know a lot more about Tua this year with this group of playmakers. That offensive line still has a ton of questions too, but I've lost a little confidence in Tua, I would say, since the college evaluation.
And when you look at this, would you say this is a make or break for him, or because he was a first-round pick? Sometimes first-round picks get second and third. Especially, I feel like first-round quarterback picks from blue blood programs. You think he gets, obviously, this year and maybe next? How do you see this playing out?
I think it depends on how bad it is this year or how good it is, right? So I do think teams are a little bit smarter as far as moving on. The quarterback position is just far too valuable to just give a guy an extra year just because you invested in him. It's not. I think they're getting smarter, and I think we have to change the way we look at teams and say, I look at Washington and Dwayne Haskins, and I say, look, would you say he's a bust or it was a bad pick? Yeah, I mean, obviously it didn't work out, 15th overall. But I don't hate the process of taking Dwayne Haskins, who could have been a good quarterback, and he wasn't, and then you move on, right? It's not like the football team's not, they're not bad for the next 4 years now because they made that move. They gave him a year and a half. They moved on. It's still, and they still have to find a quarterback. They had to find a quarterback a year and a half ago. They still have to going forward. Fitzpatrick's a bridge there now. So I think the Dolphins can view that the same way. We took a shot on Tua. We gave him 2 years. Okay, we're back in the quarterback market, right? And maybe it's the veteran market, or maybe it's the rookie market. So yeah, I think teams are better at moving on, and I think the Dolphins, the way they've built their roster, they've done a lot of smart things. And if Tua, doesn't do it this year, I think they're going to say, okay, we have to start moving on. We can't just force him out there just because we invested.
You heard it from Steve Palazzolo, Matt Corral to the Dolphins. So there we go. And we'll start monitoring that next spring. What about Daniel Jones with the New York Giants? I mean, where are we? Joe Judge, by the way, Mississippi State alum, but Joe Judge, head coach at the New York Giants. Usually the Mara family shows a lot of patience. They went through some hiccups the last few years. Where are you with Daniel Jones as a starting quarterback in the NFL? And do you think that Joe Judge is sitting there going, this is your year, buddy? And if you can't get it done, we're moving off of you.
Yeah, this is his year too. It's almost like Tua's getting tested, I think, a year early. Tested as in like being supported with good pass catchers. The Giants have done a great job of adding Kenny Golladay, Kadarius Toney. They've already got Darius Slayton as a deep threat, Sterling Shepard, Evan Ingram's there, Saquon Barkley's there. So you have all these pieces. Now, Jones in the Giants right now, I also ranked their offensive line 32nd this week in my offensive line rankings. So they've got some work to do there, some question marks. If the offensive line's a disaster again, it could be rough. But I've changed my tune on Tua coming in. I haven't changed on Daniel Jones. I thought when he came out, he reminded me a little bit of Nick Foles, where Nick Foles went on that ridiculous playoff run. He's had other times in his career, Foles, where he's looked great, and then most of the time he's looked not so good. And again, it's almost certainly dependent on who he's throwing to and a little bit of luck. Foles has this aggressiveness where he's just going to chuck it down the field. He likes getting hit and throwing it and doesn't care. And I think Jones has a lot of that, and you saw that his rookie season. He made some incredible throws down the field, but last year the Giants had one of the worst supporting casts in the NFL, and the statistics were terrible for Daniel Jones, even though I thought he played much better than the stats would show. So I really think perception of Daniel Jones is going to fluctuate with what's around him, and it depends on how much you're willing. So it just puts pressure on the team builder. Give him a great supporting cast. He has a chance to go on these runs, make some big downfield throws. But if you have a bad roster, I think you're going to get bad results. And I know that sounds cliche, but Daniel Jones in particular, I think, is going to, kind of be just a product of what's around him.
And so if you had to call it, where does this go? He's a backup after this year?
I think he'll have his best season. The O-line, I think, will be a little bit better than my 32nd ranking, but I think Jones will. He shows enough flashes that he'll lurk around. And I'm also thinking the Giants and Gettleman might stick with him longer than, say, the Dolphins would stick with a Tua. So part of me is dependent on like what I think the decision makers are going to do. I could see Jones kind of sticking around a little bit. Hey, Eli didn't look good his first few years either, and they've been comparing Daniel Jones to Eli, since before the draft. So
yeah, and that's the whole David. The media does that just because David Cutcliffe coached both of them, and right. They're kind of, I guess, similar builds, and they're with the same team. Okay. So Eli flipped it. Eli kind of. I think where you're going there. So Eli struggled. I wasn't really monitoring that closely those first few years. Obviously, it was year 4 or 5 they win the Super Bowl, but he it took him a little while to get up and running. Steve.
Yeah, look, it's one of those things where you could always show talent. Eli always had talent, right? It was like he had a better arm than Peyton, and he could throw the ball outside the numbers, and he was tough, and he did all this stuff. But on the field, you just didn't see great production. 04 was his rookie season, 05, 06. Even in 07 when they won the Super Bowl, it wasn't like Eli. It wasn't like everybody watched him and said, all right, he's figured it out. This is, great Eli. He wasn't even that good throughout much of the year. But Eli always had this volatility to him where he was aggressive and he could make special throws and all these things that I was saying. And when you have that, when you have volatility, it just takes the right combination of pass catchers and everything coming together, and you go on this run or this stretch. And, there's a lot of quarterbacks. I think Jameis is a quarterback that's like that, right?
Interesting.
There might be a lot of bad in there, but when it all comes together, you get fireworks. And I think that's what we saw for much of Eli's career. There were just these spurts of really excellent play, including the 2 playoff runs.
All right. Steve Palazzolo, Pro Football Focus. Do you think that the Cowboys don't let Dak let it rip enough? Like they have micromanaged him to the point where because you got to have. I know it's a fine line for y'all running the numbers, but there are moments where you have to have a little gunslinger in you. I know people run from that because maybe Favre and others have done it too much. But what do you see with Dak and maybe the too conservative approach out of the Cowboys camp?
I think what I've seen from Dak is, just efficiency-wise, he's been really, really good. And I thought they unleashed him a little bit last year, almost by necessity because of the defense early on. But the numbers we ran before the season last year were, watching how well guys graded when they threw the ball 40 times or 50 times. And this is where, like, Brady's just a star, right? A lot of times when you say, hey, go win the game, quarterback, it's a challenge, right? You want to have balance and all that stuff. Like, Brady's the one guy who you just put it in his hand 40 or 50 times and he's even better, and most quarterbacks get worse. But Dak was really on the low end of performance in games where he had to be the guy. And I was actually a little surprised. I wasn't surprised by it because I think looking back, I'm like, there haven't been a whole lot of games where Dak had to win it from start to finish, where other quarterbacks have had to do it. Games where you're just taking the run game away or you're taking certain things away and the quarterback just has to work the quick passing game and take shots and all that. So I think that's part of it. Dak has struggled a little bit in what I'd call high volume games when you have to throw it 40 or 50 times. So I think that's a valid criticism. However, in normal game script games, so to speak, Dak's been efficient and been excellent. So I think he'll get better at some of the high volume stuff. But I think if Dallas feels more conservative sometimes, it is because historically I don't think Dak's done great in those particular situations.
Interesting. Okay. Well, we'll leave it there. Steve Palazzolo, how's the podcast going? You having fun?
Yeah, going great. Still going twice a week, PFF NFL podcast, and finding some great NFL things to talk about every week.
It's incredible, man. This thing's a monster, and it just gets even more fun and cool and interesting and wild. The Aaron Rodgers stuff. All right, real quick, 20 seconds. Aaron Rodgers takes another snap. I'm going to ask you this all summer. Aaron Rodgers takes another snap for Green Bay, yes or no?
I'm going to say yes now. Back to, I think the trade talks are cooling. Rodgers back, sucking it up in Green Bay.
Bam. Palazzolo on the Modelo guest line. Thanks, buddy. See you, man.
Sorry.
Steve Palazzolo, Pro Football Focus, PFF.com, on the Modelo guest line. Don't forget that Mudbugs, that best crawfish in Mississippi, they have Modelo on draft, which is amazing. Mudbugs, 2 locations in Rankin County, one by the reservoir and one in Brandon. Mudbugs, best crawfish in Mississippi. Back in a sec.